And before we have all of our panelists coming up to us, we would like to say that the ecological sphere of Ukraine has had a lot of successes. So in 2016, we have published information on the level of the water of Ukraine. So now our specialists can also follow the influence of the pollution situation and follow whether the legislation of the ecology is being taken. So I also would like to clarify what are the other data on the environmental situation that we need in Ukraine and what the civil activists do, how they receive their data, and whether they think whether it's valuable and whether they change the situation that we have in place. So all of it is going to be covered by our speakers. And if you're still in our neighboring room, so please, we would like to invite you once again to join us here. So please welcome the moderator of the panel, Roman Zinchenko, the co-founder of Green Incubator. He's on the left from my side. So Roman, I would like to pass the floor to you and would like you to introduce all of the other speakers.
Thank you so much, and thank you for such an opportunity. Well, in fact, I will be on the mode of a happy amateur, because, in fact, for this panel, I am here with a bit of a different sector. We are the green organization, but first of all, we are dealing with the innovations which concern energy sector, and after that, sustainable development. So for me, the data and open data is a kind of a shell in the ocean. You dive deep down in the ocean to get this shell. Sometimes you're suffocating because of the lack of air. Sometimes when you have the whole bag of these shells, you still have this noise in the ears or a kind of a sleep disease, but still, you're still really tortured opening this shell. And you can have several options. Maybe this is just the shell and that's it. Maybe this is a very little pearl inside, or it will be a super rare but incredibly beautiful pearl, for the sake of which you needed to overcome those meters and meters of water and to choose and to select among the thousands and thousands of shells. Dear community, I'm an amateur. I'm really excited and about what you're doing, because you're diving deep down for those shells with open data, very often without even knowing what you find in this shell when you finally open it. So, being an optimistic amateur, I'd like to ask you the following questions. The questions are all overall for all of you. Would you please boast with your pearls? What have you found in the ocean of open data? And when with, or sometimes with the subtle tools, sometimes rather roughly, you had to open those shells to bring out those shells onto the daylight, to show them to the people. I think Mr. Mikola will begin with you, because you have the biggest scale of ecological material, and we are in the country which declares European approaches from the point of view of accessibility of ecological data, though so far not always we practice that. So where are we moving to, heading for? When shall we be synchronized and provide the maximum access to the ecological data? And of course, which seas did you have to dive into, and which pearls, or maybe empty shells, you managed to find during the course of your work? Thank you so much for that question and for the metaphors. I would even develop this metaphor in this aspect, because I think that in the majority of cases, when you dive and you take out the shell, it will be just a shell. But there is the difference, as with any subject, with any object in our life, what you can do with this object in the future. You can just throw it away and it will be somewhere at the shore, or you can get lots of those shells and create something, make something creative, or to use them in some other way. The same concerns all the data when they are separate and very they in particular, they cannot tell you themselves anything new, but if you think on the models and form certain algorithms, then they begin to work in the full force, and you can make conclusions then, and to see, as one poet said, deeper and farther in comparison with all the rest. If we speak about the policy of open data we are developing on in the Ministry of Natural, together with the colleagues from the State Agency on Water Resources and other agencies under subordination of the ministry, we have the several factors. For instance, European integration, we are not only declaring, we are working on the implementation with the approaches which can be available in the European Union. In lots of cases, this is just the beginning from scratch to refound the system of monitoring, how we gather, how we process and publish the data. And I think Mikhailo will tell you about that in more details. Even how we gather the data about the water, we'll have to totally refound the system of monitoring. So this is a very overwhelming period we are now at, because when we try to get to know new ways of navigation in the sea and new tools which are used in this shape, maybe we're having the new engine, but we don't know how to take the max profit of it. So maybe we are still not in the open sea. We are somewhere in the harbor, making those, providing those tests and trainings. But overall, we are having lots of discoveries, as you mentioned, which impress our imagination. For instance, as for European approaches, together with the colleagues from the European Union, we held the research on the state of the Black Sea. There were 2 expeditions during the 2 years, and there is the database which we try to shape, and we will open this data to make certain analysis out of it. And by the way, the second expedition was headed by the Ukrainian scientists, and this is the acknowledgement for us that we can work and gather the data which are qualitatively correspondent to how it's done in the European Union. That's a very relevant topic, the research of the Black Sea, considering the geopolitical challenges we are facing around the sea. So, what impressed you out of those reports you've seen in this analytical work? Whether the Black Sea is alive, what threats and hazards exist for it, and what do we need to do with it? Coming back to your shells, your metaphors, I personally was impressed with when you look at these data, those are just big tables. Sometimes they are colored, a big data set which tells us about something. So the further interpretation and processing of these data is much more important to make certain conclusions, because this process is much more exciting. It excites the heads and the minds of lots of scientists, and the commitment the people are working with it really impresses, because so far Ukrainian scientists have never seen such quality of data. So it was really interesting for them to work, and I think this process really impressed. As for the state of the sea, well, of course I cannot tell you about that in a nutshell, because we have a short report with the processed results at the website. This is not the data, this is information already, because it's processed and with the conclusions. But I think during the next months we'll have the second report. As for the second expedition, it will be even more interesting, so I invite you to expect for it, and that there will be a separate presentation about that. Thank you for that point of view. So let us have the point of view of the citizen now. You've mentioned that a very important thing is an algorithm, or the set of algorithms which are working with the data, which gave certain results. If we look, do I understand correctly that both the protection of health of a Ukrainian citizen is also in the context of the ecological situation? It is the priority of the ministry, right? I'm not mistaken. So, from the point of view of the protection of interests of the Ukrainian citizens, what's the name of that algorithm which is whirling in the main technological and analytical brain of the ministry. What does it do and which solutions does it allow to take, or maybe what civil and public algorithm you need to parse all these data and to generate the solutions which would help the Ukrainian citizen. Because the data without the solutions, well, is just an or. But the managing solutions and the state solutions are important. What are those algorithms and what that polls or what are those polls they are preparing? This algorithm, if you may say so, we name it a system of open environment, which will include several components of different information and data, and correspondingly informational and analytical modules which will manage the whole bulk of information we are having. Those are very different data sets, diverse data sets about the quality of the water resources and about the air, the soil, biodiversity and the greenhouse effect. All of this bulk of information is incredibly important for all of the analysts, for those who deal with the economy or the protection of the nature. So the name of the algorithm is an open environment we are working on. Very soon we'll approve this concept, and I think that soon maybe we'll have even the first opportunity to see how the system is working. And then I will ask the question to the audience. Dear community, who of you, would you please raise your hands, who of you is already ready to prepare the conferences, hackathons, analytical reports, researches of the bulks of data founded on this window of ecological data open environment? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, I can see then more than a dozen of hands. Okay, it means that now we have to go on with this conversation further on, but I do hope that we'll manage to do something. Let's move on about the state officials then and institutions. One day I stopped bathing and swimming in the Dnieper River, but last year at the Cyprus I got acquainted with the Bulgarian team of startups scientists who were offering the project which is rather similar to what you, Mr. Khorev, is doing. He is the first deputy of the head of the State Agency of Water Resources of Ukraine. He is changing the situation in the direction of what is known, publicly known, about the water. I will tell you about the startup of the Bulgarian colleagues. They were concerned with two problems. The first, why I stopped swimming in the Dnieper River. We know that is blue and green seaweed, but this is the weed which is only one dimension of the problem, because they are not only because of them the fish is suffocated in the seas. They are not only the problems of the phosphates, those blue-green algae, but because the soil loses the microelements and the stimulating growth fertilizers. So what does this team do? They deal with the shells again, but the different ones. They create the great vertical mussel farms which feed on those blue-green algae, taking out the phosphates, taking out the microelements, and after the harvesting of the mussels, you spoke about the shells, those shells are coming back to the fields to enrich them with microelements. This is a very long way of what's called a circular economy or so on, from the river to the sea. You have more than 400 spots of gathering of data as for the state of the waterways. And what did you find? What did you see? What are your discoveries? And maybe we should come back and swim into the river again, into the Dnieper River, or maybe we should flee from some territory. What do we need to know, and what do we have to do with that? You know, in comparison with you, I'm still swimming in the Dnieper River, and I will tell you more. I even drink the raw water, raw tap water. Without the filter? Without the filter. Well, I have a little cellulite filter, and I filter it, and it has a bit of the time after to not to have any of those substances just to erode them or to weather them. So it's much better than what we buy in the bottled way, honestly. Though lots of cities and villages cannot afford themselves to drink tap water because the quality of the equipment and the preparation of water can be different. Kiev, in this case, is still the leading city. Still, this is the capital. As for the data, really, we have 400 spots where we monitor, but this is not enough for our state, because the territory of our state is really great. We have a great amount of rivers, and when we faced it, what we saw making this data public, lots of people just said, okay, that's nice, but where is our river which flows through our village? Where's the river which flows through our town or city? And where are the data about our village or city? We are interested in that. On the other hand, not so many people are interested in the data of the water quality. We were expecting for a serious discussion after we make public these data. We were expecting for some destructing criticism that we are monitoring the different way, the wrong way, and just the state wastes the money not for the proper things. But instead of that, we just got several articles. You should better construct a road. Yes, it is possible. Why not? But what I want to tell you, people are interested, first of all, whether they can drink tap water, whether they can swim in it or bathe in it, what's the quality of the water according to certain parameters and criteria. They are not interested in that. A very limited number of scientists deal with those issues. A certain number of civil activists are dealing with those issues. And, in fact, the team of open data, which done most of all to popularize this point, developing several tools, not to have just tables with data and uncomprehensive for common people figures, but certain colored and interesting diagrams, to understand everything quickly and simply, to understand if it's good or bad.
So it's just 400 points of the data receiving. So how many do we need? Well, if we're speaking in theory up till now, then there's already been mentioned by Mykola that we're turning to the European accesses and we're trying to change the monitoring, and they have this division of the rivers on the water massives, and according to that, in every water massive there has to be monitoring in this. So in our state there is still work that has to be done, so we're speaking about 12,000. And money-wise, I think it would be better to do the roads. Oh, there's a lot of money needed. I do believe that analyzing just one data set single time on those components that we need would require around $200-300, and it has to have those analyses, like there has to be like 12 times a year, so basically just 1 point is going to be from 2,000 to $3,500 just for one data set. So you can just multiply it on 12,000 and you will have the amount of money that is needed. But we've mentioned this civil analytics based on the open data. And we have said that there is a civil society interested in that and what the society can do if they get the access to the open data. And when you said that it has to be 12,000 points of the data selection, data receiving, and when we only have 400, you reminded me of another situation on the ecological data gathering. There was a very important part of it, a very important share of it, a very active civil interest. 2012, the group that was initiated by Joey Ito in Japan, one of the top managers of Wikipedia, as far as I remember. So let us say this technical entrepreneur. So the Safecast group, what did they do? They have created a network of the Geiger measurers, and they've created this crowdsourcing of data on the radiation situation in Japan after the Fukushima catastrophe. What do you believe? Whether we have the potential on this, let us say, civil gathering of data in our situation? IRA has shown us how the civil society is dealing in Dnipro, how much do we count on the work of the civil society in this part? So do we have this possibility, and that the citizens are going to be the laboratories, the sensors of gathering and transmitting this data? Or it has to be a super hierarchical structure with the supreme laboratory in Kiev that is going to deal with all of those materials and data? So can we do it a dispersed system? What do you think? I believe no, because there are very specific polluting substances that has to be monitored, and it's hard to monitor them and hard to define them. It has to define the content of those elements in water. So you can measure air, you can measure mineralization. There are some kind of simply equipment that you need for this express analysis, but something that is going to be really bad for the ecological situation of the water beds, something that kills fish, something that kills the specific plants in the water. They can only be defined, it can only be investigated by the laboratories, by specific laboratories. It doesn't really mean it has to be specifically situated in Kiev, or there should be in Slaviansk, Uzhhorod, Zhytomyr, or whatever other city, but it has to be the lab and it has to be professionals who know how to do that. Unfortunately, if we could use something that you mentioned, and if we could use civil participation in this, if we could use just the Geiger measure, Geiger counters, or just to measure the air level of air, then we would use it. That was just an analogy. I see you have a replic about it. Yes, I have a remark about it. Yeah, I do agree with the monitoring of the water resources, because there are specific polluting substances, and it's not just having some sample of water and measuring something. There has to be a specific point of check. But there is another example on the ecological information, on ecological data is gathered, something that we did as the Ministry of the Natural Resources. What we've did in the recent years, the so-called EcoMap resource, where the citizens could have informed us about the garbage landfills, and there was the opportunity to react to the administrative procedures on cleaning up those gatherings of garbage. So there might be different conclusions drawn from that, looking at analyzing the analytic data, but then again, there are a lot of examples in the world, more than you have mentioned. So you can recall that a couple of months ago there was the conference in Wuhan, so it is responsible for the access of the ecological information, and the best practices have been discussed there on the access to the ecological information. And this resource, as the EcoMap, has been also evaluated and assessed at this forum, not only as a resource of raising the awareness and delivering the information, but also as a resource that gives us the possibility to influence the decision and monitor the decision implementation. Another project, this is the Sam Glass project on the Black Sea once again. It's more about children's project, but then again, while you're playing the specific application for iOS and Android, then you can take photos, for example, of the shells that you will see. This is something that has been mentioned by the program, and based on that, the scientists have already come up with an algorithm of how can you define the state of the sea according to this photo. So this is a combination of something that is useful and interesting. We can provide you with a link. Maybe you'll be interested with that. Yeah, so this is an interesting, the civil crowdsourcing, educational crowdsourcing. I would like to come back to Mikhailo, because we do still have two super interesting people, but then again, back to Mikhailo. At this super specific polluters that we can only it can only be analyzed only in the specific professional laboratories, only on this 400 points of the information data selection. What is the biggest challenge that you have opened it, like not the small problem, but the huge problem that all of the society should be aware of? If you have some win situations and victories, that will be good also. You know, for me, the biggest victory would have been if we not only could open the data on monitoring, but if we could also open the list of the biggest polluters, the plants and the organization that are polluting the water objects most of all. And we wanted to have the civil society to have the additional critique towards these enterprises, and they would say like, no, that's not us. So there's no reaction from both sides. So they say, okay, we are the polluters, that's it. And this time the civil society said like, okay, so they're polluting the atmosphere, so let them continue polluting it. So this is the biggest problem for us, the biggest thing that we've lost, for example, this indifference from the society. So the society is not ready for analyzing this data, and they're not ready to demand from the polluting enterprises to stop the pollution. You know, I know at least one representative of the civil society, the person who would say like, I'm not interested in that. Anatoly, if you will allow me, I would like to change the order, because in one place the civil society has just said we're not interested in that, but they've said the polluters, you know, you're cheaters. You're cheaters and you're cheating us in a big way. And we're now speaking about not money that way of the water resources of Ukraine, but then again about the state of the environment. So how can we catch the polluters? How can we catch the polluters? Using the data and using the, let us say, more accessible channels of communication than the gigabytes of great tables. So I would like to turn to Irina Chernesh, the person and the team that is a great inspiration for me, even though we're 400 kilometers apart. The Save Dnipro project, the project that's has shown us that even the monsters of the energy, of the fossil energies that can be negotiable with them, like for example we did the memorandum with you, we did the memo with you, we're good and cool, and the Save Aquabot project, Irina. So how the polluters cheat and how the data help you to identify them and to get them into the light. Thank you very much. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Honestly speaking, in order to answer your question, and I do believe that I will have to tell you a little bit of our history, the history of our project. Around like 3 years ago, I was really far away from ecology and the questions, issues of the pollution of the environment. And for more than 8 years, I live closer to the DTAC of the Pridniprovia hydroelectric station, and 70% of pollution of the city is being generated by this plant. And when I have understood that all of the diseases from in my family, all of the allergic reactions, it's not just because of the health reason, but also because the district around my residence is more polluted. So I was looking for someone who has to protect my constitutional rights, but then I've spent a lot of months to join different roundtables, commission and sessions, but it didn't give me any of result. It was all in vain. And around a year ago, we've met with boys and girls who were just like me. They have just understood that they cannot take it anymore. They're representatives of many different businesses. They're all far away from the ecologies, but we're starting to look for all the most needed ways. So we used all of our skills and knowledge that we have. And when the phase of the active advocating campaign of our initiative group, Save Dnipro initiative group, when we started to active measures, so we had this law on evaluating the impact on the environment. And because of the communication of the Ministry of Ecology and our polluter, in order to come up with more update and modernization, they also should comply with the law. And because of this procedure, It's not just using the tests or engaging the mass media, but also we could ask them to consider our expert offers, because in 3 years I was gathering the most of information. It was really hard for me because of the information on the permission for the polluting plants, because for the citizens it's unacceptable. You cannot reach it, so it's inaccessible if you cannot reach it, but you have to spend a lot of time to get your hand on this information. When we've reached all of this advocacy campaign and we've reached the good result, because for this modernization of Pridniprovska heating electric station, we never dreamt about. So the filtering systems that were taken new in place and monitoring all of the pollution that they produce. So our main development, Pavlo Tkachenko, who is here today also, he also lives close by this plant. So he developed the software. So he told us, like, let us create a tool that will give us a possibility, that gives a possibility to the representatives of the civil society to monitor whether all permissions are in place for the plants, for the polluting plants. Why do we need that? Because of the representatives of the civil society, we should not observe only, we should not just like see the data on the pollution and to understand that we are being poisoned. But we also need to have an instrument that can help us to influence on the polluters, to have an impact on the polluters and influence on the pollution level. So if we haven't started our active work, then the following pollution of this enterprise would have been significant in next year. But then we can influence on the permission documents. That is how we got to the development of the Safe Eco bots. This is an aggregating bot that is monitoring the permission documents on polluting plants, the pollution on air, the water pollution, the permissions on the specific use of the water or specific use of the natural resources. A lot of different things. We've launched it 2 months ago, and we have had a lot of procedures in place. And what we have thought that everyone is going to receive this tool, and just like we do, they're going to stand up for their rights, and they're going to prevent from other pollution. But what we've got to that the people need really easy, simple instructions, clear instructions. So just today, this night, Pasha has reworked all of our works that we had according to instructions and the templates of the documents. What can our bot now do? First of all, you can subscribe to any kind of a pollution or the original pollution, and in the automatical regime, you can check when the additional pollution is going to be, let us say, planned by the plant. And our bot is going to give them a hint on what should they apply to, how should they react to the representatives of the civil society, how many days you have. We're going to form all the needed documentations according to the templates. And the citizens should only fill in their own data and additional commentaries. And also there are the comments on the publicly hearings. And so all of these representatives of civil society, they can know where to go to, where to turn to in order to voice out their own recommendations and complaints. So this instrument is going to be much more user-friendly and much easier for all of the citizens who are not professionals in the ecological sphere or who are not dealing with the issues of ecology on a daily basis. So in our team, in our Save Dnipro team, we are always thinking on how to prevent further pollution, and that is why we created EcoBots. Ira, thank you, but you're dealing with a super graceful business, because whole sets of data and these are unreadable tables that the deputy minister has mentioned, then you're processing that this data, unreadable and accessible data for the mortals people. So this is the real victory in all capital letters. But there is a small problem in that, because by declaring these pollution levels, they're really cheating us. They can turn off the filters, they might not declare something they can pay a fine and not get an inspection coming to the plant. How can we fight this? How can we make bots hunt the enterprises who are always violating the ecological legislation, even in the framework of all of this pollution that they have declared? Well, unfortunately, yes, this is the situation we have in place. Unfortunately, the control on the activities of the enterprises in the environment protection sphere and the sanitary sphere is really bad. But So there is a lot of holes in this sphere. So if we're planning to, what we want to have is a mass product, we want everyone to use it. So we have tested it in our practice, tested the issues of the templates, of the complaints to the ecological inspection, and I do believe that in closest time we're going to also add it to our EcoBots, in order for every citizen to be using this bot, so you don't have to read additional laws or additional decrees, so you can just download the template of this document and you can send it where it is needed. But then again, without the specific reform on the system of the monitoring and control, it will not have a lot of impact. It will have a lot of obstacles in place. Because nowadays the ecological inspection, they cannot come to the main plan. So it's not working, or they're not going for the planned inspections. So even those successes that we reach, we cannot control and monitor further, because the information is not being provided to us. So, of course, there is very important that the main structure would have been working on this issue also. Do we need the specific the meters and the specific meters at the point of selection? Yes, of course, and we've initiated in our city for this measures to be mounted. We want to have all of those counters and all of those measures around our main polluter, but it has to be a demand created by the society. In order to do something, in order something to happen, we need to pose a question. We need to wake up that demand from the citizens. Of course, if we're going to have a system of complex monitoring in place, and every citizen will have the access to that, then of course there's going to be that demand for that. So, dear citizens, dear representatives of civil society, this is the second time that we hear in our panel the request for demand, for interest from the society side. And I would like to quote one of the most interesting moments that happened to me 3 years ago in Germany, or 2 years ago in Germany. I had the pleasure of visiting the German Institute Agora Germany Verne. This is the biggest analytic structure in Germany that is now researching and studying the big energy shift in Germany. And it was January, and Germany has reached 33% of the renewable energy in their circle. So Gerd Rosenkranz, one of the brightest minds of this company, he said, the success of Germany has only been possible because of the society consensus that has been reached in the 70s. So this 40 years, for 40 years, the Germans have been pushing their members of parliament. So maybe nowadays we're going to have the inquiries to boards, and the board is going to be pushing the parliaments and the corresponding structures. But then again, while still we don't have a consensus in place, then it's still a big issue for us. But let us continue. There is one problem. I shouldn't be a moderator, I guess, because I'm a fan of these people. I really love the people who have launched the journalism of data. And Anatoly Bondarenko is one of those people who is now promoting the journalism of data. You can call me Bondarenko Bots, because I really, really appreciate what you're doing. And your Ukrainian concrete data on the investigating the state of Ukrainian rivers is one of the best examples of how the data can not only be turned into a beautiful shape, but also how to make you fall in love with data. Tola, can you tell us, please, what are you bringing into the light? What are you investigating, and how are you fighting for your sources of information? As far as I understand, you're combining the data, the state-owned data, the data of other sources to build up those data sets. And how are you doing this work of researchers, of the pioneers, of the conquerors? And what are we should wait for, and what should we look for in the next?
Thank you. Yes. Roman already founded this tradition. This is a kind of a holy mix from different sources of data. It's not just a holy combination. We're using, apart from the state institutions, and as a rule, In the majority of projects, we cannot deal with them only, of course. It's not enough. So before telling you in details how we do that, I'd like to mention a couple of remarks what was already mentioned above. For instance, the remark of my colleague that this project we implemented together about the pollution of rivers was not that so popular among the masses. I don't know. In fact, it had one of the biggest interface problems, is that each spot has almost 20 indicators, 16 if I'm not mistaken, and it's not so easy for people to understand if 16 sports, out of 16 sports, 2 is okay and 14 are not okay. Is it okay at overall or not? This is just a cognitive problem first of all. So we decided to get people acquainted who are using this service, how the rivers are created in Ukraine, how they exist in Ukraine. This is a very beautiful picture. You can visit the website of Texty.org.ua. You can see all the basins, the Dnieper, the Dniester River and the Danube basin. They're all very beautiful. And because of that beauty, the main producer of this project was Zhenya, who is present here now, so we decided to focus upon the beauty of this project. Maybe it's not useful and this pollution, but we decided to focus upon the beauty of this project. So we created a kind of sakura beauty with the branches, and each branch is 16 indicators. If it is green, it is okay. If it is red, it is bad. And it simplified the perception because it's so complicated to understand all the 16 indicators at once. So when I look at that map, I can make at least 2 conclusions. The first, when there is a strong flow, you can swim. And when there is a weak flow in the beginning of the river, in the Danube of Odessa region, you shouldn't swim at all. Those are first 2 conclusions out of the map. As for Roman and crowdsourcing of this information, well, of course, to crowdsource such a complicated meteorology, I don't know. Maybe it will be reviewed according to the European standards. It will be measured differently, and ideally for the crowdsourcing you need something simple. You said about the Geiger thing, meter. Yes, that was just the speed of impulses a minute. One figure, one parameter. So if we create a crowdsourcing, it should be a kind of a pregnancy test. This is the next stage for the future. You're just using a one-time test and you can see whether you can drink the tap water or whether you can swim in this basin or river. This is the only way to crowdsource it. All the rest is too complicated. Then those tests have to be marked properly, not to have different interpretations. Yes, that is why the startups exist. But we are developing only the strategy here now, right? But in fact, not only out of the open data you can create interesting ecological projects. Not only with our open data, the Ukrainian ones. You've mentioned the project on which radically acknowledges the simple thought everybody knows about. If the city has the park, it's convenient to be there in the summer, and if there is no parks, you should flee from that city. So we used the open images of Landsat satellites and compared, according to one of the methodologies, the temperature of the surface in the Kiev city and other big cities of Ukraine, where they have the big index of greenery and where there is any greens. So the difference between the concrete and the greens is impressive. It can be up to 20 degrees Celsius in summer. Let us not cut the trees and let us found the parks. It will be more and more relevant because the temperature increases. And one more project I need to mention about was not done thanks to the open data. We managed to process, the project about the illegal amber It was a very interesting project. So we processed approximately 500,000 images with the help of the machine algorithm we created ourselves, and we found the biggest map. We created the biggest map of the places of amber extraction. It's a very interesting story, and honestly speaking, it's one of my biggest sorrows that we don't have such an infrastructure as they have in the US. We don't have so many satellites, because in the US, if you don't know that, the most important open data are the data from the satellites, which are published for free access, and they generate the biggest economic profit. So we don't have any satellite images from Ukraine, but we can do lots of interesting things. For instance, to try to find about the forest cuts and about the amber extraction. In the process of the modeling, we found that this model even found something different, not only the extractions. For instance, the litter and garbage. And you can see even 1 or 2 or 3 cars of dumps, according to the data of 2015. Unfortunately, we don't have the image of all of the regions, but of the 3 regions only. So satellite shots give fantastic opportunities, even those we have already. There used to be a project a year ago about the algae you mentioned, with the Landsat satellite shots, and we looked at the change of carniv or quality of water, so we could see this blue-green dragon which is growing and growing. I don't know whether I made you interested. Well, honestly speaking, I'm not working enough as your fan, because I don't know your project on amber, but still you're becoming something like Bellingcat, but not in the military, but ecological data. Well, I can't say that we're specializing on ecological data only, but in fact you can create such a service. Well, thank you for such nice words. So look, I, in fact, maybe, well, just make someone suffer, but I think that the data is worth nothing if you don't take any decisions after the procession of the data. Those are just disks or cloud data and nothing more if you don't have certain decisions and solutions after that. And the peculiarity of our country, which is always governed by the scandals and betrayals, we need some envy, some Facebook, and in the end we'll have a big Ukrainian bad results. So after you publish the results of the obvious points, have you seen any of them managing decisions or solutions? So in fact, lots of what you published somehow ended up in the category of ecological disasters or national betrayal or treason. How does it influence onto the decision-making, including political and state decisions? Do you see that influence when the data is transformed out of the hypermassive of data to the data which are possible for reading by people? Do you see this effect? Do they influence the decision-making process? By the way, this is the question for all of you. About the data, do they influence the decision-making at the level of the state, of hromadas, communities, of the cities? Well, we have the effect, but not the expected effect, honestly speaking. Did they threat you? Well, I don't remember ecological points, but I can mention several different other examples. When we looked at the railway data and found a story that in the most crisis moments of the revolution, Yanukovych fans were brought by special trains to Kiev. We investigated that, and only 3 years passed when we had the signal from the General Prosecutor's Office, and the authors of this investigation even gave certain evidence So they had the procedural status of a witness. Yes, they became witnesses. I can see a very big and beautiful zero, and as far as I understand, this is the end. So, dear colleagues, maybe you'd like to have a short final words, but super short. Yes, as for the events, we should always remember that if we create a certain project with data in a very narrow branch, with a very narrow matter, we need to have it in a broader context and to understand that this is the issue we are focusing upon. This is really the most important, or maybe the greatest pollution, but in a broader context. Otherwise, we are risking to attract attention and to stimulate to the events or things which shouldn't be that urgent. All of those points have to be very responsible, and they will work best when we all together managing to do what we are planning to do, to reform the monitoring system and to have the data which really witness about the ecological state and will allow us to prioritize the points. And after that, with the colleagues, we'll create the projects. Then it will be done in a serious, systematic and highly scaled way. I do hope that after those words we'll be able in a year to say, yes, we really see the high quality decision making based on the data driven, and the analytics data in the state institutions for the sake of the citizen. Yes, I'd like just to say something more. Yesterday we had the policy brief presentation about the EMBA project. We included the ecologist who recommended what can be done, what's the scale. So we had a month of negotiations with lots of state institutions, the police, the General Prosecutor's Office, but nobody came. Only one guy from the Geological Service of Earth and Ground. Well, this is a very interesting information about the forum, about the open data in the EMBA. This is really the topic for digging up and investigating, but we need to move on. We need to find our shells from the sea of the data. So if you heard that it's better to create roads than to open the data, we'll speak about the roads now. Roman Khmyl will be the moderator of the next discussion. Thank you to all of our panel participants and have great success in your work. We are moving on to the next conversation. Thank you so much.